My HOA Karen called 911 on my son when he came to visit me in his Lamborghini Huracan, claiming he stole the very car she just bought. 1 minute, I'm a 72-year-old man enjoying my morning coffee. The next, she's on my lawn, screaming that my son is a criminal. Before I could even react, sirens are screaming down our quiet street, and my son is being treated like a car thief right in his own father's driveway. But as she waved around her fake proof of ownership, I realized this wasn't just about a car. She was hiding a much bigger lie from the entire neighborhood. How do you prove the truth when a lie is so crazy? Everyone starts to wonder if it might be true. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The morning of Tuesday, June 4th, started just like any other. The sun was warming the vinyl siding on my small porch. My coffee was hot, and the neighborhood was quiet. At 72, you learn to appreciate these small pockets of peace. I'd lived in this house for 45 years, raised a family here, and planned to spend the rest of my days right here on this porch, watching the world go by. The lawns were green, the birds were chirping, and for a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumble from down the street. It wasn't the sound of the mail truck or the garbage collection. This was something else. The rumble grew into a clean, powerful roar that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards of my porch. I leaned forward in my rocking chair, squinting into the morning glare. A shape, low and impossibly black, slid into view and glided to a stop at my curb. It was a Lamborghini Huracan, my son's car. A smile spread across my face. My boy had done well for himself, building a business from the ground up, and while I never cared for flashy things, I was proud of what that car represented. His hard work, his success. The driver's side door swung up like a wing, and my son, Mark, stepped out grinning. He was in his mid-40s, but to me, he'd always be the kid I taught to ride a bike on this very street. He waved, and I was about to wave back when a shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. "You? What do you think you're doing?" I turned my head. It was Karen, the HOA president, from 2 houses down. She was standing on her lawn, hands on her hips, her face a mask of pure outrage. "That's my car! You're stealing my car!" My smile faded. I stood up slowly, my old knees protesting. "Karen, calm down," I said, my voice steady. "That's my son, Mark. He's just visiting." But Karen wasn't listening. She started marching across her lawn towards mine, a woman on a mission. "I just bought that car yesterday. I have the paperwork. I'm calling the police." The absurdity of it was staggering. Karen, who drove a 10-year-old beige sedan and complained about the cost of everything, had somehow just bought a $250,000 supercar. My son, a man who ran a successful company, was a car thief? I saw a few of my other neighbors peek out from behind their curtains. Mr. Henderson next door gave me a sympathetic, confused shrug. Mark just stood there by his car, looking completely bewildered. He'd dealt with tough negotiations and hostile takeovers in the boardroom, but this was a different kind of crazy. "Ma'am," he started, his voice calm but firm, "I can assure you, this is my vehicle. I have the registration right here." He reached for his glove box, but Karen let out a shriek. "Don't you touch anything. You're tampering with evidence. I'm calling 911. And she did. Right there, on my front lawn, she pulled out her phone and stabbed at the screen. Her voice was loud, performative, for the whole neighborhood to hear. "Yes, 911. I need to report a grand theft auto in progress. A black Lamborghini. Yes, he's right here. He's trying to get away." My heart sank into my stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a deliberate, malicious attack. This wasn't just a neighborly spat that would blow over. She was bringing law enforcement into this. She was creating a public spectacle designed to humiliate my son and terrorize me. In that moment, as she barked my address into the phone, it all clicked into place. This wasn't the first time Karen had used her power to make life difficult. I remembered the string of emails from last month. A 3-page notice, complete with threatening legal language. Because my garbage can was visible from the street 2 hours after pickup. Another fine because a single shingle on my roof was a shade lighter than the rest. She ruled with a binder of bylaws that seemed to change whenever it suited her, paperwork that no one else ever got a copy of. I thought about the dash cam I knew was mounted inside Mark's car. It would have recorded his perfectly normal, perfectly legal arrival. It was a receipt, a piece of the truth. While Karen was busy playing the victim, smirking as she hung up with the 911 operator, I knew this was just the beginning. The police were on their way. My neighbors were watching, some with concern, others with the kind of hungry curiosity people have for drama. My son was about to be questioned by the police because of a lie so insane, so utterly baseless, that it was almost believable. And I realized this was no longer about a car. It was about my home, my family, and a lie that could destroy everything if I didn't find a way to stop it. The distant wail of sirens began to cut through the quiet morning air, getting closer with every second. The battle had begun. The squad car rolled up without fanfare, its blue and red lights flashing silently, painting the houses across the street in brief, stark flashes. A single officer, a man who looked younger than my son but carried himself with the tired patience of someone who'd seen it all, stepped out of his vehicle. He adjusted his belt, his eyes scanning the scene. The impossibly exotic car, my son standing beside it, me on the porch, and Karen, who immediately strode towards him like a general greeting her troops. The tension was thick enough to taste. Neighbors weren't even pretending to be discreet anymore. They were on their porches now, phones in hand, recording the suburban drama. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly," Karen began, her voice dripping with manufactured distress. "This man has stolen my vehicle. I have the bill of sale right here." She fumbled in her oversized purse and produced a creased piece of paper, holding it out as if it were a sacred text. The officer took it, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the paper, then at the Lamborghini, then at my son. "Sir," he said to Mark, his voice calm and professional, "can I see your license and registration for the vehicle?" Mark nodded, his jaw tight with a frustration I knew he was fighting to control. He walked calmly to the passenger side, retrieved a leather-bound folder from the glove compartment, and handed the officer his driver's license, the vehicle's official registration, and the insurance card. All were in his name, with his correct address. The officer took his time, examining each document under the morning sun. He ran a thumb over the state seal on the registration, then walked to the front of the car to check the license plate, then back to the driver's side to check the VIN on the door jamb. Everything matched. It was a methodical, quiet process. But for me, watching from the porch, every second felt like an hour. My son, a respected businessman who employed dozens of people, was being subjected to a roadside investigation on my front lawn. He was being humiliated. I could feel the stares of my neighbors, could hear their whispered speculation. My home, my sanctuary for nearly half a century, had been turned into a crime scene, and my control over it was evaporating. The officer handed Mark his documents back. "Everything appears to be in order here, sir." He then turned to Karen, holding up her piece of paper. "Ma'am, this appears to be a printout of a stock photograph with some text typed at the bottom. It's not an official document." Karen's face contorted. "It is too. He must have forged his documents. He's a professional criminal." It was in that moment, seeing the blind, stubborn rage in her eyes, that I remembered the other pieces of paper. The HOA notices she'd slid under my door. They had always felt off. The letterhead was slightly blurry, as if it had been photocopied a dozen times. The official-looking seal at the bottom was pixelated. The language was overly aggressive, filled with threats of liens and legal action for infractions as minor as a crooked garden hose. I had dismissed it as petty incompetence, the work of someone who enjoyed the small taste of power her position gave her. Now, I saw it for what it was. A pattern. She didn't just enforce the rules. She fabricated them. She created her own reality, backed by her own forged documents, and bullied anyone who dared to question it. The officer was losing patience. "Ma'am, Filing a false police report is a serious offense, he said, his tone now carrying a clear warning. The evidence here strongly supports his ownership of the vehicle, but Karen was immovable. She refused to retract her claim. She doubled down, insisting the police were incompetent and that she would be taking this to the HOA board and her lawyer. The officer, clearly seeing this was a dead end, sighed. He made a few notes in his pad, advised us we could file a harassment complaint if this continued, and got back in his car. The silent, flashing lights were switched off, and just like that, he drove away, leaving the wreckage of the morning behind. The neighbors slowly retreated back into their homes. The show over for now. My son leaned against his car, the adrenaline leaving him looking exhausted. "I can't believe this, Dad," he said, shaking his head. "I take a day off to come see you, and I end up being treated like a car thief." I felt a fresh wave of shame and anger. This woman had invaded our lives, created chaos, and faced zero consequences. My first instinct was to go inside, lock the door, and just try to forget the whole ugly affair. That's what she wanted. She wanted us to be so worn down by the absurdity and the embarrassment that we just let it go. And that's when I knew I couldn't. A quiet resolve settled over me. This wasn't just a bad neighbor having a bad day. This was a calculated abuse of power. I looked at Mark. "Son," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "the first thing we do is document everything. Right now. Go get the footage from your dash cam. I want it saved on a hard drive. I want the exact timestamp of your arrival. We'll save the texts we sent this morning confirming your visit. We're going to pull every threatening email she's ever sent me. We're going to build a file." Mark looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He saw the shift. This was no longer about defending ourselves. It was about going on the offensive, but with truth as our only weapon. As we went inside to start gathering our evidence, our receipts, I glanced out the window at Karen's house. She was standing at her window, watching. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She was observing, probably already plotting her next move. I realized with chilling certainty that she was never going to admit she was wrong. This wasn't a mistake she had made. It was an attack she had launched. And this single, insane event was just one part of a much bigger, more rotten system of control she had built for herself. This fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The day after the police left was unnervingly quiet. The whole street seemed to be holding its breath. Mark had to get back to the city for a meeting, but he left the Lamborghini parked in my driveway, a silent black monument to the previous day's chaos. It felt like a dare. Before he left, we sat at my kitchen table and made a list. Step 1 was done. We had documented our side of the story. We had the dashcam video of his arrival saved in 3 different places. We had screenshots of our text messages from the day before, confirming his visit. We had the car's GPS log, which showed its exact location for the past week. But I knew that in a fight like this, our proof was only half the battle. The other half was chipping away at Karen's credibility, and for that, I needed other people. I started that afternoon. I didn't want to make a big show of it, so I waited until I saw my next-door neighbor, David Henderson, out by his mailbox. David is a retired mechanical engineer, a man who thinks in straight lines and trusts numbers more than people. He'd lived here almost as long as I had, and we had a comfortable, respectful relationship built on years of borrowing tools and waving across our lawns. "David," I started, walking over slowly. "You saw the commotion yesterday, I'm sure." He nodded, his face grim. "Hard to miss. Is your boy all right?" I explained the situation, not with anger, but with the simple facts as they happened. I told him about Karen's claim and the fake bill of sale she'd shown the officer. David listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking from my house to Karen's. "It's a lie, of course," he said, not as an opinion, but as a statement of fact. "But it's a clever lie because it's so insane, it makes you question your own senses." Then he did something that gave me my first real glimmer of hope. He started thinking like an engineer. "Let's forget what she said for a minute and just look at the physics," he began. "She claims she bought that car yesterday and it was stolen from her. Where was it parked? How was it moved? A car like that isn't quiet. It has a state-of-the-art security system, an alarm that would wake the dead. It has GPS tracking hardwired into the engine block. You can't just hotwire it like in the old movies. You need the key fob, which I assume your son has. He was right. He was providing the expert verification I needed. He was taking Karen's emotional, baseless accusation and holding it up to the cold, hard light of logic. Her story falls apart under the slightest pressure, David continued. There are no receipts for her version of events. No tow truck records, no broken glass, no alarm report, nothing. Just her word. Your son, on the other hand, has a mountain of proof. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was an ally. He agreed to write down his observations as a professional engineer, a formal statement about the practical impossibility of Karen's claims. It was another receipt for my growing file. But as I was building my case on facts, Karen was building hers on fear and fiction. Later that day, I saw her talking to Mrs. Gable from across the street, a sweet woman who was easily flustered. Karen's arms were waving, her voice carrying across the lawn. She was painting a picture of my son as a dangerous outsider, someone who brought trouble from the city. She was planting seeds of doubt, turning neighbor against neighbor. Mark called that evening, his voice tight with frustration. Dad, maybe I should just come get the car and we can let this go. It's not worth the stress. The weariness in his voice hit me hard. This was exactly what Karen wanted. She wanted to exhaust us, to make standing up for the truth more painful than just accepting the lie. No, son, I said, my own resolve hardening. We're not letting this go. When you let a bully win, they don't stop. They just move on to the next target. This isn't just about you or your car anymore. This is about this neighborhood. It's about my home. We talked for another hour, firming up our plan. We were going to be methodical, patient, and relentless. Just before I hung up, an email notification pinged on my computer. The subject line made my stomach clench. Official HOA. Notice. Emergency Board hearing regarding incident on June 4th. It was from the HOA secretary. I opened it. Attached was a PDF file. Karen's official incident report. My hands trembled slightly as I read it. The lie had grown. She now claimed my son had verbally threatened her. She alleged that the car had been parked in front of her house and was moved in the dead of night. She even included a blurry, nighttime photo of a dark-colored Carrot. Could have been any car on any street as proof. She was formally requesting the board levy the maximum possible fines against me for rule violations and take action to have the stolen vehicle removed from the community. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a formal document full of venom and lies, sent to everyone on the board. The fight had officially been escalated. She had taken her personal delusion and laundered it through the HOA's bureaucracy. Now, it wasn't just her word against ours. It was our word against an official report. The date for the hearing was set for 1 week from today. The clock was ticking. Karen's email was a declaration of war. That emergency hearing notice wasn't a request for information. It was a summons to my own execution. She had framed the narrative, submitted her falsified evidence, and now she was giving me 1 week to prepare for the trial she would be presiding over. A feeling of cold dread tried to creep in, but I pushed it back. I'm 72. I've worked with my hands my entire life, and I know one thing to be true. When you're facing a complex problem, you don't panic. You get organized. You make a plan. You build. The next 4 days were spent at my dining room table, which I had converted into a command center. Mark came back over on the weekend, and together we built our case, piece by piece, receipt by receipt. We called it the binder. It was a simple 3-ring binder from the office supply store, but it was about to become the most important tool we had. The first tab was labeled The Arrival. In it, we put a high-quality printout of a still frame from Mark's dashcam. It showed his car pulling up to my curb. The timestamp, clear as day at the bottom of the screen, read, Tuesday, June 4th, 2 a.m. It was irrefutable. Behind that, We printed the text message exchange between me and Mark from the night before, where he confirmed he'd be arriving around 9. Simple, normal, and utterly damning to her story. The second tab was the vehicle's location. This was Mark's specialty. He pulled the complete GPS and telematics data from the Lamborghini's onboard system. He printed out a map showing the car's exact location for the 24 hours leading up to the incident. It showed the car parked in his garage 40 miles away, all night on June 3rd. It showed its journey, minute by minute, directly from his home to mine, on the morning of June 4th. It directly contradicted Karen's claim that the car had been parked on her street and secretly moved. We highlighted the key data points in yellow. The third tab was pattern of behavior. This is where I went to work. I dug out every single email, every fine, every violation notice Karen had sent me over the past 2 years. We printed them all. The shoddy, pixelated HOA logo, the increasingly aggressive tone. We laid them out in chronological order, creating a clear and undeniable timeline of escalating harassment. It showed this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a long campaign of intimidation. And finally, the fourth tab, expert witness. We included the signed statement from David Henderson, the engineer. He had written it in plain, simple terms that anyone could understand, explaining why Karen's story was not just improbable, but physically impossible. The binder felt good in my hands. It was heavy with facts. It was our shield and our sword. Just as we were finishing, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. It was a woman, and her voice was quiet, nervous. She introduced herself as Sarah, a younger member of the HOA board. "I'm not supposed to be calling you," she whispered, "but I saw Karen's incident report. It's a lot. I just wanted to say, make sure you bring all your documentation to the hearing. The board takes physical evidence very seriously." She hung up before I could say much more, but it was enough. It was a crack in Karen's fortress. Someone on the inside had doubts. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Of course, Karen must have sensed she was losing her grip because her retaliation was swift and petty. 2 days later, I received 2 new violation notices in the mail, both signed by her. The first was a $150 fine because the Lamborghini, a personal sports car, was being classified as an unauthorized commercial vehicle parked in a residential zone. The second was a $75 fine for unapproved landscaping modification. One of my rose bushes had a branch that extended an inch over the concrete path. It was absurd, childish, and transparently vindictive. We carefully placed both notices in the pattern of behavior section of the binder. They were perfect exhibits of her abuse of power. I knew then that waiting for the hearing wasn't enough. I had to counter her narrative on the ground, in the neighborhood. I made a few copies of the GPS map and David's 1-page summary. That afternoon, I saw Mrs. Gable checking her mail. I walked over, not with anger but with a calm smile. "Mrs. Gable," I said gently, "I know there's been a lot of commotion, and I'm sure Karen has told you her side of things. I'm not here to argue. I just wanted you to have the facts." I handed her the 2 sheets of paper. She took them hesitantly, her eyes darting towards Karen's house. She glanced at the map, then at the engineer's summary. I saw her expression soften, the confusion and fear replaced by a flicker of understanding. I just nodded and walked away. I had planted a seed of truth. I felt for the first time like the tide might be turning. I was in my driveway later that evening, discussing the plan for the hearing with David, when it happened. We were just 2 neighbors, talking quietly, but I saw the curtain in Karen's front window twitch. A moment later, she was on the phone, her face a mask of theatrical panic. 5 minutes after that, the same police car from before pulled up to my curb. The officer stepped out, and this time, the weariness on his face was mixed with genuine annoyance. He walked straight up to me. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "we've received a 911 call reporting that you are on your neighbor's property, harassing and threatening her." My blood ran cold. The binder, the proof, the small victories, none of it mattered in this moment. It was my word against hers, again. But this time, the accusation wasn't about property. It was about a threat. It was a criminal complaint. My heart pounded in my chest. This was a new level of escalation. A false 911 call about theft was one thing. A false claim of harassment and threats was a direct attack on my character, on my very freedom. Before I could speak, David Henderson stepped forward calmly. He was still holding the papers I had given him. "Officer," he said, his voice the steady, measured tone of an engineer explaining a blueprint, "I have been standing here with my neighbor in his own driveway for the past 10 minutes. We have been discussing the upcoming HOA hearing. At no point did he raise his voice. At no point did he leave his property. We were having a quiet conversation. The woman who called you has been watching us from her window the entire time." The officer's gaze shifted from me to David, then across the lawn to Karen's house, where the curtain twitched again. He let out a long, slow breath, the kind of sigh that says, "Not this again." He looked back at me. "Sir, I'm required to investigate the call. Did you threaten your neighbor?" I met his eyes directly. "No, officer. I have not spoken a single word to her today." He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. He walked over to Karen's door and knocked. We couldn't hear the conversation, but we could see her wild gesticulations, the pointing, the feigned terror. After a few minutes he returned, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "She's retracting the claim of threats but is insisting on filing a formal harassment complaint with the HOA," he said. He handed me a card with a report number on it. "For your records." And just like the first time, he got in his car and drove away, leaving us in the quiet aftermath of her storm. But this time, the quiet felt different. It felt dangerous. The ground beneath my feet had shifted. Karen wasn't just trying to win an argument. She was trying to build a case to have me legally removed from my own life. The next morning, I saw her at it again. She was walking from house to house, not with anger, but with a concerned, sorrowful look on her face. In her hand, she clutched a stack of papers. She handed one to Mrs. Gable, who read it and then looked over at my house, her expression turning from sympathy to fear. Later, when I went to get my mail, I found one of the papers stuffed into my mailbox. It was designed to look like a legal document, a preemptive restraining order. It had a fake court seal at the top and was filled with legal jargon, warning all residents to avoid contact with the belligerent party at my address, pending a formal court hearing. It was a complete fabrication, a piece of theater meant to isolate me, to paint me as the neighborhood menace. My son was beside himself. "This is insane, Dad. She's impersonating a court officer now. We have to get a lawyer." I felt that same surge of panic, but I held it back. A lawyer would cost thousands, and this wasn't a courtroom. This was a neighborhood. Her power came from the HOA, from the flimsy, pixelated documents she used as her holy text. I realized then that I couldn't just disprove her lies. I had to disprove her authority at its very source. This was step 3. I had to cross-check her documents with the originals. I drove downtown to the county records office, a place I hadn't set foot in for 40 years. I spent 2 hours with a helpful clerk, pulling the original incorporation documents and the master bylaws for our homeowners association, filed back in 1988 when the development was first built. I paid $20 for certified copies. Back at my dining room table, I spread the official, legally filed bylaws out next to a stack of Karen's violation notices. The difference was immediate and stark. The official HOA seal was a clean, sharp graphic of an oak tree. Karen's was a blurry, distorted copy. The official font was Times New Roman. Hers was a messy Arial. But the biggest difference was in the rules themselves. The real bylaws were simple and focused on shared infrastructure, road maintenance, septic systems, and the upkeep of the small park at the end of the street. There was nothing, absolutely nothing about the color of roof shingles, the placement of garbage cans, or what constituted a commercial vehicle. She had taken the framework of a real organization and built her own tyrannical regime on top of it. inventing and enforcing rules that had never been voted on, never been ratified, and never legally existed. The fines she was levying, the power she wielded, it was all based on a lie. A lie printed on forged letterhead. I felt a surge of cold, clean anger. She hadn't just targeted me. She had been defrauding the entire neighborhood for years. This was bigger than a car, bigger than a false police report. This was systematic. The emotional low point came the day before the hearing. A community Facebook page that I rarely looked at was buzzing. Karen's narrative was circulating. I was the problem neighbor. My son was a suspicious element. People who I'd shared a fence with for decades were now divided. Some defended me, but others were wary. The seeds of doubt Karen had planted were sprouting. Mark called, his voice heavy. "Dad, one of my business partners saw the post. He asked me if everything was okay. This is starting to affect my life outside the neighborhood." That was her goal, to inflict so much collateral damage that I would finally surrender. Tuesday night arrived. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the Drab Community Center meeting room. Mark and I drove over in my old pickup truck, leaving the Lamborghini in the garage. As we walked toward the building, I clutched the binder. It was filled with our truth. Timestamps, GPS logs, real documents, expert testimony, and her long history of fake notices. We opened the door. The board members were seated at a long folding table at the front of the room. Sarah, the young woman who had called me, gave me a brief, nervous glance. And at the head of the table, in the president's chair, sat Karen. She looked up as we entered, and a thin, triumphant smile spread across her face. She thought she had already won. The air in the community center meeting room was stale, thick with fluorescent light and unspoken tension. About 15 neighbors were scattered on the folding chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and a grim sense of obligation. Mark and I took seats in the front row. I placed the binder on my lap. It felt solid, heavy with the truth. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice ringing with an authority she clearly believed she owned. She started by reading her incident report aloud, her voice quivering with faux emotion as she described the trauma of seeing her stolen car. She painted my son as an aggressive intruder and me as a hostile, non-compliant homeowner. She then presented her evidence. She held up the same fake bill of sale she'd shown the officer, a grainy photo printed on cheap paper. She displayed the blurry nighttime picture of the generic dark car. She passed around copies of the falsified restraining order, her magnum opus of forgery. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes, weaving a tale of victimization so elaborate, so detailed, that I felt a pit of despair open in my stomach. She was a masterful liar. The calm, rational approach I had banked on felt hopelessly outmatched against her raw theatrical performance. Some of the board members were nodding along, their expressions sympathetic. I could feel my neighbors behind me shifting uncomfortably. Was this it? Was this how it ended? My lifetime of quiet integrity erased by a binder of lies. When she finished, she looked directly at me, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. The board now calls on the homeowner to respond to these serious allegations. My hands were cold as I stood up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain steady. I walked to the front table and opened my binder. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and even. "I'm not here tonight to tell a story. I'm here to show you the facts. I'm here to show you the receipts." I started with tab 1. This is a time-stamped photo from my son's dash camera. It shows him arriving at my home on Tuesday, June 4th, at 9:02 a.m. This directly refutes the claim that the car was present the night before. I then moved to tab 2. This is the car's official GPS data for the 24 hours in question, provided by the manufacturer. It shows the vehicle was located 40 miles away until it was driven directly to my home. This refutes the claim that the vehicle was moved from anywhere within this community. I could feel the atmosphere in the room begin to shift. People were leaning forward. The board members, who had been listening to Karen with passive sympathy, were now studying the documents with focused attention. I presented David Henderson's expert analysis, of why the car couldn't have been moved without a key and without setting off multiple alarms. The logic was clean, simple, and undeniable. Then, I moved to the final section. And finally, I said, my voice dropping slightly, let's talk about the HOA's authority to levy these fines and hold this hearing in the first place. I pulled out the certified copies of the official bylaws from the county records office and laid them on the fine sound table. Beside them, I placed a stack of Karen's violation notices. This, I said, tapping the official document, is the legally binding set of rules for our community. And this, I gestured to her pile of pixelated papers, is something else entirely. I pointed out the discrepancies, the fake logo, the non-existent rules about garbage cans and shingles. The fines levied against me, and likely against many of you, are based on rules that do not exist in our legal bylaws. They are fraudulent. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale, then blotchy with red. She shot up from her seat. This is an outrage. He's presenting forged documents. He's trying to undermine the authority of this board. The room erupted into murmurs. It was teetering on a knife's edge. My calm, rational evidence was being met with pure, unadulterated rage. For a moment, it seemed like her chaos might actually win. It was a classic bully tactic. When the facts are against you, just get louder. And then, a quiet voice cut through the noise. It was Sarah, the young board member. She had been silent the whole time, her face a mask of conflict. Now, she stood up, holding her cell phone. I have something, she said, her voice trembling but clear. At our last board prep meeting, I was concerned about the inconsistencies in Karen's story. So, I recorded the conversation. The room went dead silent. Karen froze, her mouth half open. Sarah pressed a button on her phone. A recording began to play, and Karen's voice filled the room, not the measured, presidential tone from a moment ago, but a coarse, agitated one. I don't care if the car was his, her recorded voice snarled. He's arrogant, and his father is a problem. You just have to make it look official. Exaggerate a little. Nobody reads the fine print anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was fixed on Karen. The smirk was gone. The righteous anger was gone. In its place was the hollow, blank look of someone who had just been caught. The lie, so powerful and overwhelming just minutes before, had completely collapsed. The other board members were staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. A police officer, who had been requested by the board to be present for security, took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes locked on the pile of forged documents on the table. The foundation of Karen's power, built on a mountain of fake paperwork and intimidation, was crumbling to dust right before our eyes. The aftermath of Sarah's recording was not loud, but crushingly silent. In that silence, Karen seemed to shrink. The powerful HOA president who held sway over our lives was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling woman trapped in the glare of her own exposed lie. The police officer, who had been a quiet presence at the back of the room, now walked calmly to the front table. He picked up one of Karen's fabricated restraining orders, then one of my county certified bylaws, comparing the two. He didn't need to be a document expert to see the fraud. He looked at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "filing a false police report, forgery, and mail fraud are serious crimes. I need you to come with me." There was no dramatic outburst. No final, desperate plea. Karen simply deflated, the fight gone from her. She stood, and the officer gently guided her toward the door. As she passed my chair, she wouldn't meet my eyes. The entire room watched as she was escorted out of the community center and into the quiet dark of the parking lot. The click of the door closing behind her was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter ending. Instantly, the tension in the room broke. One of the other board members, a man I barely knew, stood up and addressed the room. Effective immediately, the board rescinds all fines and violation notices issued to this homeowner. Furthermore, we will be initiating a full audit of all HOA activities and finances conducted under the former president's tenure. A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost buckled my knees. Mark put a steadying hand on my shoulder. Neighbors who had been avoiding my gaze just an hour before were now coming over, shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. Mrs. Gable came up to me, her eyes filled with tears of regret and relief. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you," she whispered. I just nodded. There was nothing more to say. The battle was over. The weeks that followed were a blur of restoration. The HOA board, with Sarah now acting as interim president, sent a letter to every single homeowner. It contained a copy of the real, legally filed bylaws and a formal apology for the years of overreach. They announced that a third-party auditor had been hired to review every fine Karen had ever issued. Within a month, checks began arriving in mailboxes all over the neighborhood, refunds for made-up violations going back 5 years. Mine was for over $3,000, for everything from the crooked garden hose to the lighter-colored shingle. David Henderson and I helped the new board draft a clear, simple guide for residents, outlining our actual rights and the HOA's true, limited responsibilities. We made sure everyone understood the power of documentation, the importance of verifying official papers, and the simple fact that you don't have to surrender to a bully. My son, Mark, came to visit more often after that. He would park his Lamborghini right in the driveway, and it was no longer a symbol of conflict, but a quiet reminder of the ridiculous lie that had brought our community together. We'd sit on my porch, drinking coffee in the morning sun, just like we used to. The neighborhood was different. It was calmer, friendlier. People talked to each other more. The fear that had hung in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of shared ownership. We had taken our community back. One afternoon, as Mark and I sat on the porch, a moving truck rumbled down the street and pulled up in front of Karen's old house. A young family got out, the kids immediately running onto the lawn, laughing. A sold sign was hammered into the grass. I learned later that Karen had pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a trial, receiving a hefty fine and a long probation. As part of the deal, she had to sell her house and move out of the county. She was gone. Her chapter was closed. Looking back, the whole thing felt surreal, like a bad dream. But holding the binder, which I kept on a shelf in my office, reminded me it was all real. It was a testament to a simple principle I've lived my whole life by. You can't argue with gravity, and you can't vote against facts. The truth, when properly documented and calmly presented, is the most powerful force there is. A lie can make a lot of noise, but it can't stand up to a single, verifiable receipt. My home was safe again. My family's dignity was restored. And I had my peace back, right here on this porch, earned not with anger or revenge, but with patience, persistence, and the quiet weight of the undeniable truth.